Welcome. You are listening to the Be a Better Being podcast hosted by Michelle Zellner and Sasha Berscheid. Michelle and Sasha are here to give you information and inspiration to help you live your healthiest, happiest lives. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
Greetings. Thank you for tuning in to the Be a Better Being podcast. I'm Michelle Zellner, your host, and I have a really cool guest with me today. As you all know, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and there's so many things that impact our mental health. And when I discovered Abigail and what she does and where she came from, I thought this is a perfect person to come on and talk about her journey and what she's doing now, because I have a feeling that it's going to resonate with a lot of people. So, Abigail Luvisi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited
Yes.
to be here.
Well, I'm excited for this conversation because I think it's one that we don't really have on a deep level. When we talk about our mental health and why we experience what we experience and where that all comes from and all of that, and then how to shift into a different state when we recognize that it is not helpful and not helping us live our best lives. So let's give the audience just a little bit of background on you, and then we'll start to unpack some of these details.
Yeah, so I was raised in a very spiritually abusive, emotionally abusive, even domestic violence home. And so very neglected, and I got married when I was just about to turn 18 and married into a LDS family. And so went from a very Pentecostal home to a Mormon family and went into Mormonism myself, and then didn't realize that I had married into a narcissistic marriage, and my husband was a sex addict, and I went in and I was a stepmom. He had already had a kid with somebody else. And so that was already, by 18, right? And just like how I was kind of saying right before when you asked my age, I am turning to 32 this month. So I've had a lot of life. I actually have 3 kids, biologically mine, and then I am remarried, and we've been married for about a year and a half, and he has a daughter. And so there's been a lot of healing there for me and even my husband currently. And that's kind of, I guess, an overall a little bit of that. So wherever you want to go from there.
Wow. I mean, for real, I think that is I don't know if it's a rare kind of life these days. I would say it's relatively rare, much more rare than maybe 30 or 40 years ago, where so many people got married 18, 19, 20, right? I know many people are pushing those off for much later years. Gosh,
Kind
yeah,
of the
where'd you
joke.
go?
It was always kind of the joke when I was marrying into my ex-husband's family. They're like, "Oh yeah, you were supposed to be Mormon," because that's very culturally
Mm,
what they do. Like
yeah,
the women marry like at 18,
yeah.
and that because the husband's usually on their mission and they come back and they get married and start a family, because it goes into this whole spiritual thing of that you're supposed to be come from heaven, and that's why you have kids. It's a whole thing. Anyways, that's a whole nother subject.
It is a whole other subject. I've had a couple of other guests who have talked about kind of their own experiences with growing up in a certain kind of religious belief. And not that there is anything wrong with any of that, right? It totally is. It fits beautifully for many people. So this is not judging anybody's way of life by any means. This is Abigail's story
Yeah.
and certainly the things that have impacted it. So let's talk about just, growing up in that abusive, neglectful kind of environment. Give us a little more detail about what that was like on a day to day basis for you, and friendships, relationships, how that shaped you, and maybe how it even probably led you to choosing something that was relatively similar, even though you probably didn't know it at the time. So give us a little bit about that, like your own physical and mental health as you were growing up in that environment.
Yeah, I think the more that I understand, about what we seek out as we get older, and how we really are just trying to, especially those parental figures, that we're trying to seek out that connection with others now, and how I can see with my husband, it wasn't necessarily that, but it was more just trying to escape what I was living in, that environment. I don't think, you know, when I look back or think about my childhood, I can't like say, oh, I noticed this, or I think that that's why I got into the work that I do now, is because it's not the trauma that happens to us, it's the core beliefs we form around the trauma that's happened to us. And so, again, therapy is great and is super helpful. I mean, I've done it for years and that goes into the trauma, but that's why I really love what I do now with mindset, is that when we can see, oh, my mom now as an adult was neglectful and had all of these things, and I can go, oh yeah, like I can see that and have, empathy for her, but also have empathy for my childhood self in going, oh, I thought I was defective, but we can't see that as a kid, right? Like I can't see, like, we just take on those beliefs that I was, because we're egocentric as children. It's my mom was doing this, and so I thought it was me. So we end up forming these beliefs about ourselves that either I can't trust anybody or nobody's going to show up for me. And ultimately, it's all about me, right? Because that's what we do as kids. I mean, we still have a tendency to do it as adult if we don't fix our stuff. But that's why I really, my core belief is I am defective. So I constantly, I mean, I have other ones, but that's my main one, is that I'm defective. So I'm constantly like working on healing that and checking in with myself and understanding what wound is getting hit for me now and why it got hit. And the more I can understand myself, the more I'm able to kind of like give myself that ointment, right? It's like a sunburn, that I can sit here and have a sunburn and talk with you, but if it gets hit, I'm going to be affected by it and like go out into the world and project that on everybody else. So that was a whole tangent. I hope I answered your question.
You totally did. Actually, that was a great analogy because, Sasha and I talk a lot about, healing the wounds and the traumas. And yet you have to even know that you were wounded or traumatized in the first place. And a lot of times because our human just wants to protect us, it puts up those blocks and it shields us from experiencing that pain over and over and over. And often those are the outward expressions, the behaviors that we engage in, or looking for that person who's going to be our ointment, right? Or whatever it is, or that substance that's going to be our ointment, right? The things that we end up turning to. So, were there any unhealthy behaviors and habits or things that you developed as a kid and in young adulthood before you really got to this understanding of like, oh gosh, I got to go back and really explore this inner child that was really hurt and heal her?
Oh, oh my gosh. I mean, there are so many things that I'm still, working on and healing around. I think that that's something, as you're on your healing journey, for someone who can relate to me, because I know there are people that is, sometimes we think that there's this like pinnacle that we're going to get to, and we want to like latch onto that. And I think that it's just finding the rest and sitting in the uncomfortable of even knowing that like it's not, there isn't a pinnacle, and that it's okay not to know all the answers, and it's okay to not be perfect, right? From a recovering perfectionist over here. But I think, there was a lot of things, growing up, again, seeking those connections even with my ex-husband, and I never felt like with friends that I truly kept friends and connected with them, and I overshared a lot. So there was a lot of oversharing with trying to get that connection of, let me just tell you all these things because I'm trying to connect. Or I find a lot of people connect too on the whole gossiping level when we, talk poorly about people. And are we really like connecting that way? That's not true connection. It's all just trauma bonding at the end of the day. And that's what I was really good at and understanding now. And kind of what I had said, it's interesting to share more of my story because I have really healed from that. So now I don't share as much. Like the times I do share is when it's a teaching moment. And I check in with myself is, oh, am I sharing to share, or am I sharing because I truly want to help somebody too? And as somebody who does have that spiritual abuse too, like for me, there's so many layers, right? Like I was taught, got to give, because that's what Jesus would do, right? And so now really learning like, oh, am I giving from my heart, or am I giving out of this place of feeling like I need to so that people accept me and love me and I feel worth? And so really challenging all of those things. But I didn't really start to even unpack all of that until I was able to recognize my emotions. And I think a lot of people don't understand or know what their emotions really are because all of this other stuff is controlling them. So, for me, when I started going to group therapy, and I know we kind of touched on, I said the sex addiction, that's how I really got into the group therapy, was they would ask me, how are you feeling emotionally, physically, spiritually, and relationally? And I would literally sit there. They gave me a feeling wheel. And that's like, it's the funny thing because that's what I do with my clients now. I give them a feeling wheel. And every time we check in, how are you feeling emotionally, physically, spiritually, and relationally? And there were times, and it being on the opposite end now, where I literally would just sit there and I'm like, I don't know. Because we so often are like, oh, I feel angry for the week, or I feel like it's been a hard month or a hard year, right? How are you feeling right now?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I even think back, I'm much more seasoned than you as far as time on this planet. Sasha doesn't like it when I say I'm old or I'm older. It's fine. It's not judgment. It's just reality. We didn't talk about emotions. We didn't learn emotions. I don't think okay. There probably was a feeling wheel. I sure was never exposed to it. Nobody ever showed me a feeling wheel and asked, how are you feeling? Right. It's just, you are what you are. You do what you do and you figure it out or you don't. And a lot of times you don't. And then that's why we have some challenges to work through in adulthood. Was that time, so if I recall correctly, you had just had a baby and then you discover that your husband is a sex addict. And so was that really the first time you even had to confront something, like really face in your face that was really traumatic? Because I think in childhood we don't always see the trauma, right? Unless it's very obvious. But like you said, we'll just think it's our fault. Did some of that
Yeah.
still, even as an adult, like, okay, this is my fault? And
You
then how do you
know,
work through that?
yeah. So, I mean, being again in a sex addiction environment and going into group therapy, I did notice, and I know that it is very common for women to feel like it is them. I was not that. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I got lucky, quote unquote, to not feel that way. I don't know what it was that I was kind of blinded by that, I guess, but I didn't struggle with that specifically, but I do know a lot of women do. For me, because I was so young and because of how I was kind of like, raised under a rock, I think that that was kind of my like luckiness of the spiritual abuse part going into living with a sex addict, is that like I honestly nuggets that I can look back now and see, oh, this was happening. But I wouldn't even say that that was like, I mean, I didn't even get into group therapy sex addict. I went to the Sex Addicts and Wives of Betrayal, and it wasn't even till, I mean, my twins must have been one, and that was kind of the big explosion moment. So previous to that, it was like the nugget pieces. So, he had told me once, like, oh, like right when we were married, it was like, oh, like pornography came up on the screen and I just wanted to let you know. And so I was like, the 19-year-old, I'm like, okay. And I mean, to the world, pornography is, very, I mean, it's taboo to kind of start talking about on the all of it in general, but I was just like, okay, like I didn't even think anything of it. I was like, thanks for like letting me know. Like I didn't even know you could have an issue with it. Like I was very like so then like going into first, and she was 6 weeks old, and that was kind of like we call it D-Day, kind of like when you like hear all of it. And it was kind of like, "Oh, I've been masturbating all the time. I've been watching pornography. I've been going to strip clubs." Like, it was like word vomit on me, and I was like, now I'm just about to turn 20 with a 6-week-old, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, like, what?" what? So I immediately got into therapy because that's what my brain did is like, okay, like we need to go get help. But he was like, oh, it's not a problem. And again, me being so young, I was like, but I need to go. Because again, my core belief is something's wrong with me. So like I can fix this, right? I'm going to fix it because ultimately it's me. Like it's something's wrong with me and not being able to see that then, like it just led to all of that. What was the original question? Am I answering?
I'm not even sure what the original question was, but I think all that
Yeah.
background information is very helpful because you're right. So, I mean, I can even relate to my own experiences. Like the first very long term real relationship, I was engaged. And then I come home one day to a phone call from a girl telling me that she and David's
Mm.
child would be turning 1 next month. And she just thought I should know that before I married him. And I was 24 or 5, right? So kind of same like, wait, what? Like
Oh
totally
my
rocked
God.
my
Yeah.
world. And then yeah, like what is wrong with me that this is what you decide to do? And, clearly you don't love me and us and all of those things. And then eventually, I mean, I had a very solid core and very solid standards that were exemplified for me growing up. And I was like, yeah, I don't really actually care why or what. It's not okay. And so bye. Right. Didn't happen like that, but it happened pretty quickly. But it's those really hard, pivotal moments in life where you get to make a choice. And what is that choice? Right. I'm going to stay because I can fix it, or I recognize this is not a me problem. This is a that person problem. And so it's best if I let that person figure it out. So, how long into maybe therapy or whatever did it take before you were like, you know what, this is actually not me and I need to go?
Oh, a long time. I think again, like being in abuse, like you're definitely brainwashed. And I didn't know that there was anything else. So I think that a lot of people in general get caught in that. Like I mean, when you're in a place that you're constantly being isolated or told that you're the problem or manipulated or blame shifting and love bombing, like that was all happening. Like I'm gonna change, like I love you, like this is our family. And then, the next minute it's like, how could you like to me, like how could you do this? And every other week they're threatening divorce. Like it was super toxic, really bad. But when you don't have I didn't have a support system. Like I didn't have family. So it was me. And I would reach out. Like, I mean, currently even super sad to say, but my brother is best friends with my ex-husband. And he was one of the first people that I went to about it and said, like, I caught, my ex masturbating and looking at pornography in the room next door to my daughter and left the home. So I tried, but then I went and stayed with him and I was going to his church and they were telling me to forgive and forget. So, you know what I mean? Like when you're in a situation like you're trying, it's like I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. And again, that was really hard for somebody who, again, still is working on trusting themselves. But when you're in that big of an abusive situation where there's nobody to go to, you're looking for it everywhere and there's nowhere to turn. I mean, that's really hard to get out of. I mean, again, I didn't even finish high school. I was literally a housewife and mother supported, and I had no money. Like he had control of everything. And I was the crazy one. I was pinned to be the crazy one. And so that was my role. I was the scapegoat for everybody.
And I can only imagine too that when you do turn to somebody like your brother and you are dismissed, like that's just an additional trauma, right? Just another
Oh yeah.
person that now I can't trust, or now that I have to question, like, okay, maybe they are right. Right. And you start believing what everybody tells you. So
Oh yeah. I
eventually,
went,
yes, obviously, right?
yeah.
Let's talk about what that looked like and what that process was like.
Yeah, I mean, towards the end, so, again, we went back and forth. There was a couple times that there was a point where I had gotten into therapy again with somebody else, and they trying to like think back to the whole thing, but we had gotten back together again. And his brother actually sex addiction runs in their family. So his brother was in his addiction like heavily at that point, and they actually found this place that specializes in sex addiction and wives of betrayal. So they encouraged us to go through that program. So that's when we decided to do that, and we started going. And I really think that that was the shift for me, was because I was starting to learn boundaries, which I had never learned before, and being able to, not share things that weren't safe with unsafe people. And I literally will say till the end of time that boundaries are what ended my marriage. Really.
Yeah.
Like, he had nothing to control me anymore. He had learned, you know what I mean? Like, I had given him my control because I thought that's what I had to do. So once I was able to understand that I don't have to, he used it against me and then ultimately did. And there was so long that I actually was like, again, because of all of my different sorts of abuse, that I like heavily thought was proud of myself for not being the one to get divorced. And I look back now and I'm like, Abigail, you were an idiot. Like, how can you like even be proud that you stayed in that? You know what I mean? But I have so much compassion for her. You know what I mean? So much love for Abigail in that time. But really, I really did was so proud of that in the moment, because it was like, oh, you know what I mean? To me, it was like marriage was on this pedestal. Like, you don't leave, you don't do this, and all this. And then again, like all these layers of my beliefs that had been instilled in me, I couldn't imagine leaving. And now I'm like, I stayed in the program. He quit because he's not an addict, right? So he quit and I stayed and I finished out the whole program. And that program and my therapist, I mean, completely changed my life. I will forever be thankful for my therapist.
I mean, that's amazing. There's obviously something innate in you that is unique, because I think so many women will stay for so long because it's hard. Leaving is hard. Now he's the one that ultimately, did it, because that's usually the control and whatever. So I know you now look at, he did you a huge favor. And so here you are, how old, and your babies are how old? And then how do we go on with life? Like, what do we do in our probably still very young 20s? And
Yeah, I mean, my kids are my twins will be 10 and my oldest is 12 now. So, I've been on my healing journey for, 7+ years now. And, it took time, and I didn't think I would be doing what I did, honestly. Again, I think it goes a lot back to my beliefs of, I don't have same things I hear now too with who I work with. I don't have the right qualifications. What do I have to offer? And somebody once told me, like, oh, you only have to be one step ahead of the person that you're helping. And so I thought that that was beautiful. And that's really always encouraged me, is that we do, somebody's going to be at a different stage, and it gives us so much room to help one another and show up just the way that you are, like authentically. I never think that I would want to be in this field. And it's really interesting to see the nuggets that were left for me too. I had at one point, right when I started going to the therapist, that time that I told you that I had just found out, like my D-Day, that therapist told me, she left the room and she came back in and she said, like, I just wanted you to know that God told me that if you wanted to be a therapist, you'd be a good one. And at that time I was like, okay, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's still like comical to me. But then I would have other nuggets just like that. And then I got into this group therapy, and there's a book that we go over called Finding Peace, and it's by Troy Love. And I read the book and I went over it, and then I went to his retreat, and I swore I would work with him someday. I was like, I'm going to work with this man. Like, he's unreal. And now I help him with his retreats. And that's how I got my certification through was through him. And I mean, and works with the sex addiction field, obviously, and but finding pieces for anyone. But he's just so many tags to him. Like he's unreal. Like he's crazy, phenomenal, changing the game, changing life. Like you should have him on his your podcast. He also has a podcast. Like he's amazing.
Well, I will definitely make a note of that. Let's talk about that healing journey because, and this is something Sasha and I talk about a lot. And obviously, there are many elements that are required to heal forgiveness, right? Forgiveness of the person, forgiveness of yourself, getting over the shame, the judgment. There's fear involved. There's they don't deserve my forgiveness, or, there's all these steps. So, w- whether it's your own or when you work with people, what does the healing journey actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think a good first step is just really starting to get curious about your emotions in general. Because again, if we don't know what our emotions are, they're going to run us. I kind of heard things pulled from you just now that, like the word deserve. I really like for me and my clients, like, I try so hard not to use the word deserve because at the end of the day, I don't think we do. We're worthy of. So I don't deserve to be here. I'm just worthy of it. Or I don't deserve that chair. Like I'm worthy of it. And so is that other person. And it gives this different perspective of understanding that. But I think that's really why I believe that group work is so important in your healing journey because you can't have self-compassion for yourself until you're able to share your shame and your story with people who love and accept you. So that's why like that work was so vital to mine because I didn't have that support system, right? Like what I was sharing. And so once I was able to be in a room full of people who had knowledge and words and this education piece to be able to have a space of non-judgment to share my stuff and to be accepted as me fully of who I am, then I was able to start healing because other people, it's this like beautiful like both and like I'm watching somebody else do their healing and which is giving me self-compassion for myself, which is also helping me learn what empathy is. Like empathy is total like you learn empathy. You don't just have it. And so and same with self-compassion. Like when you're able to learn how to do these things, it really helps us forgive ourselves ultimately because we're able to show up for ourselves authentically in others. I think a really big thing also just to add is I don't think a lot of people understand the difference between guilt and shame. And that's something I always like to touch on is that guilt is I made a mistake and shame is I am a mistake. So we so easily use these words intertwine and it's usually like people are saying like, "Oh, I felt guilty about this." And so I'll ask my clients like, "Oh, but like what is the story that you're telling yourself right now with that?" Because it's usually shame based. It's really usually like I'm not enough or again like I need to be perfect or I can't trust anybody. And those are all our core beliefs showing up, which is shame. It's and so when I'm able to spill my water or okay, better example. Okay, my kids, right? Like if I go and I yell at my kids, which is not cool, and I go and I am like, okay, I need a 20-minute break because I'm obviously freaking out. So I go to my room and I'm able to use my tools, understand what I'm feeling emotionally, check in with myself, and I can even give myself a self-compassion moment in that parenting is really hard, right? Tell myself parenting is really hard. What is coming up for me right now that my kid did or said? And why did I feel like I needed to react that way? Do I need to reach out? Do I need to talk to my husband? I can calm down and see what I did and then go apologize to my child for what I did. And then that's teaching them that it's okay to make a mistake. Where I was told, you yell, you are the mistake. But now I'm shifting it really quick.
That is such a great tool. And I think whether it's your child or your significant other or a colleague or a stranger or yourself, right? Just taking that pause and checking in. And I mean, that's something I talk about all the time is our initial reaction is always our human acknowledging that we're in distress, right? That's why we react usually in some kind of negative kind of way, because it's some version of fight or flight. And when we can recognize that whatever it is not a real threat to our lives, then let's just take a pause and figure it out and adjust it and address it in the moment. Because otherwise we have those little cuts that go along and along and along, whether I'm inflicting that on someone or someone's inflicting it on me or I'm inflicting it on myself. The wound is the same. And if we can figure out, well, why did I do that? Or why might that person have reacted that way to me? And then we can go about it, hopefully figuring out how to get to a better place sooner rather than later. So we can maybe avoid all of these issues that otherwise are going to continue to fester or even to kind of, mushroom into other things that have nothing to do with the actual situation. So as you have worked on these little things with yourself, I'd imagine that that is made for a much healthier relationship in the current marriage that you're in. And did you say he has a child as well from
Mhm.
a previous? Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that because you are still very young, right? And to have all of these things and literally all of these lessons. Number one, that you chose to learn them because we all have lessons. A lot of times we don't see them as a lesson and or we choose not to learn it. So that you have done all of this at such a young age. What does that look like now in the relationship that you're in now?
Oh my gosh. I am first so thankful for my husband because he also takes this very seriously, like him working on himself and seeing that, we want to break these generational things that have happened in both of our lives and change them for our kids. We definitely did trauma bond in the beginning. And, even as aware and as much as we had healed, we definitely like didn't see it. And again, it's hard to see that. Thankfully, we both have worked so deeply on making sure that we don't stay trauma bonded, right? Because then we're not going to be able to stay connected if we're in that. So gosh, it is a completely different relationship. I talk to him about everything, even for me, again, because of the sex addiction piece, things can be really triggering for me. And so watching things and shows like he will literally stop and ask how I am. And I can openly tell him, like, this is what's going on with me, this is what I need. And being able to just really have that open dialogue. I didn't realize how much I didn't, even with being a, oversharer, how much I wasn't communicating, right? The difference with just trying to connect, but now having all of these tools to be able to go, oh, like, again, this is, and I know you had kind of said wound. I teach that there's actually 6 wounds. So understanding which wound for me is getting hit, what core belief of mine is getting hit, what my need is around that, because now I'm able to efficiently say what I'm needing and understanding what emotions coming up. Because, it takes 15 to 20 seconds to go into shame and we start that cycle. And so now I'm able to sit there and like, and again, sometimes obviously it happens. Like arguments are a part of relationship, but it's just really becoming good arguers, becoming good communicators. Like that's what it is. Like really sitting and being able to understand him and understand me and have this dialogue is changed everything for me in my relationship. I am so unbelievably thankful for that.
So before we wrap up, just give the listeners, I know you've already given a ton of amazing nuggets, but are there any like, okay, if you are if you experience or feeling shame or guilt or we're living in that place of judgment, whether we're afraid of other people judging us and so we put on the mask or we don't show up as our true selves, or we are incredibly judgmental of others or of ourselves, what are some ways to start processing through those types of emotions so that we can hopefully show up as our true selves and get to where we have the kind of open, honest, authentic relationship like you're talking about with your husband?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot of layers there, right? So first, again, I would say that start checking in with yourself with your emotions. I think I have three thoughts that if I can cover them real quick. So start checking with yourself with your emotions. Set a timer or whatever. Don't make it difficult for you. Like get a drink and how am I feeling emotionally, physically, relationally? Get a feeling wheel. Make it so it's easy for you. Second thing is because if you are in an abusive relationship or maybe you don't notice or you feel something's off, trust that. I tell people to start writing it down for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, if you're feeling a certain way, sometimes we think like, oh, like again, right? Because if we don't know our emotions, like, oh, it's just a moment in time. This is just happening right now. But if we're able to start writing it down for 2 weeks, once that thing that keeps happening is happening, you're able to have tangible evidence now that something's going on and it needs to change, whether it's a boundary, a relationship, right? Like something's off. And then thirdly, once you're able to kind of do those things and get deeper in understanding our shame a little bit more and what those stories are that telling us, I call them the shame shadows. So there's six of them and there's the judge. So that's telling us like I need to be perfect. So it comes in and is like, you're not doing this right. You need to be perfect. And the politician comes in and says that you need to put on the mask, right? Like you need to earn points to be perfect. So you can get enough if you can do this enough, people will accept and love you. So the royal is the one that kind of is the deserving one. The royal says, like, I deserve that. Like it puts us above others. So it's judging others and putting others down to uplift ourselves. The rebel is like, F it. I don't care who I hurt, what happens, like I'm gonna do it anyways. So usually the royal and the rebel, I mean, they are hand in hand for addicts. Like they're like, you know what I mean? Like, can you hear that? So, and then the impotent one is like Eeyore. Like, why bother? All or nothing thinking, black and white, like nothing will ever change. This will always be this way. So, and then there's the martyr. I have to sacrifice myself and lay down myself to make everybody happy so that people love me. So when we're able to kind of do those other things, we can understand our emotions. We can kind of start hearing the stories that are coming out. And I can now recognize mine with, especially, again, it's just so easy for me to do with like my kids as an example. When my martyr comes out, right? I can be like, oh, I see you, right? Like I need to sacrifice myself, the martyr, and the politician comes in, I can earn enough points for you to love me. And then if I don't do it right, the judge comes in and tells me I'm defective, right? That main core belief of mine will come in. And if I can see them when it's happening, I can go, hey, shut up. You are not needed here. I can show up authentically for me in my beliefs that I am enough.
I love that. Everybody listening, please rewind and listen to that again because that is so beautiful. And I know we can all identify with all of those at various times. And I think so important is to see it in the moment or maybe very shortly after the moment. But that requires you to be actually tuned into yourself and to decide to do some reflection. And so many people are just too busy. I don't have time. We'll just move on, and that is why we end up not truly healing and learning and getting to be our authentic selves, right? Because it's easier just to move on than it is to stop and do this work. And yet, everybody, you've listened to me a million times, it's hard now or harder later. So you have to do your hard work. And it's messy and scary and it's painful and I mean, that's just what it is, and yet it's also the one thing that is going to let you live a joyful life and have a fulfilling relationship or feel that sense of purpose and value and contribution and authenticity in the life that you're living. So, this has been great, Abigail. I appreciate you sharing your story because I'm sure it's not easy to talk about things like that, right? Because we do. And I'm guessing because I know this for me, when I was an oversharer as well, I think that's something we all can fall into. Everybody's got an opinion on what you should or shouldn't do, how you should or shouldn't feel. And usually it's coming from a good place, right? They care about you, and so that's why they're telling you these things. But when maybe they don't know the full capacity of all of it, or they don't have that kind of perspective because it's such a foreign situation for them, or because they have had a different kind of upbringing and don't have any concept of what it's like to have lived in a a abusive environment and how that can actually mold and shape somebody. They can't fully be compassionate and empathetic. There's almost no way possible, right? Because their role is to give you advice, to tell you what you should and shouldn't do, because they just
Well, that's
want
all
you to
shame
get better.
though. That's
Right.
what I and
Exactly.
that's what I would ask is like, "Oh, hey, what's coming up for you?"
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
can't do that and ask, "Hey, what's coming up for you?" if I'm in my own shame,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because there's no room for empathy with shame.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, I think these are some really great concepts for a lot of people to explore. And hopefully you heard one thing that maybe you're like, that little thing is really making that thing make some sense. And you'll get to a place where you are courageous enough to start having the conversation, because that's the other thing, right? These are hard conversations to have with anybody. If we don't have them, we get nowhere. So, any final thoughts? Of course, we'll put all your information in the show notes if anyone wants to get in touch with you, but anything that we have not touched on that you want to make sure the audience knows?
I guess the last thing was you were just kind of talking about the thought came to me is like, how often do we sit with ourselves when we were talking about like how busy we are, right? And I mean really sit with ourselves, like not with the music going, not journaling, not going on a run, not aimlessly like doing things, but like really just sitting with ourselves. And I think for me, that's what really shifted too was I ultimately was afraid of myself. If I sit alone with myself, am I even going to like me? And so when I was able to start sitting with myself and challenging that belief, I think that that really shifted too, because I was able to take more inner looks of who I am and the thoughts that were going on and challenge them. And that also just helps so much with self compassion. I mean, Jay Shetty talked about in his book, just spending 20 minutes a day can insanely increase self compassion for ourselves.
Yeah, you're 100% right, because I teach and talk on this a lot. And I will ask people to separate their unique named individual self from the human being that they're in charge of. And I call it's my boss method, BOSS: be quiet, be still, and breathe. And feel like, I don't want to be quiet and be still. I don't like that. Right.
Yeah.
And the O is observe. Observe your thoughts, your feelings, your energy, your emotions. The first S is scan, head to toe. What is your human trying to tell you? Any physical signs that maybe it's not super happy? And then the second S is serve. How can I, Michelle, serve my human to get it to a better place? And I do this method in corporate classes with individuals, and people do not like to sit and be quiet with themselves
Yeah.
because, to your point, we're a little afraid, right? And yet the
Yeah.
only way you can learn anything, if you're the boss of anything and you want the product or the project to come out well, you have to do all those things. So if I want Michelle to come out well, I kind of have to know her.
Yeah.
Like, I got to know
Yeah.
a lot. And then I have to figure out, okay, what can I do to help Michelle live her best life? And it's a big process. So, yeah, I think you're 100% right. Thank you for reiterating my beliefs. I think that's always helpful.
Yeah.
When
Absolutely. And
two
thanks for sharing
people,
that too. I love that.
yeah, when two people who have never met each other are literally saying the exact same thing, and I'm 50, you're 32, and we're saying the exact same thing, guess what, people? It's because this is the way it is. This is real. This is how you do it. So, thank you so much for coming. It's been a true delight. I mean, I can tell your passion and your energy. It's amazing
Mm.
and it's infectious. And I applaud you, because my gosh, so many people will never get to where you've gotten based on where you started ever. And that you
Mm.
have done it in a relatively rapid fashion is amazing. And I know you're going to change so many lives in just the time that you spend working with people. So, thank you. Kudos to you. Your generation gives me hope when I meet somebody like you.
Well,
Yes.
thank you so much too for having me on, and I love what you're doing, and that just really brightened my day. I love that. So thank you
Yes.
so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. And now I know you by now you know what to do. It's your turn to go and be a better being.
Thank you for listening to the Be a Better Being podcast. Michelle and Sasha hope that what you heard today inspires you to embrace this journey of life with an open mind, a kind heart, and a willingness to learn and evolve. If you enjoyed the content, please help spread their message by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. If you have a show topic idea or would like to be a guest, please visit betterbeings.net and fill out a contact form. Until next time, go and be a better being.